State Representatives Jack Daniels and Josh Williams, thank you for coming on Message from the House.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
I know it's a busy day in Columbus, so I appreciate you guys making time to talk about a very important bill that you both introduced, among many that you have proposed that are important. I want to start before we get to the bill to first ask about each of you and your districts and who you are as lawmakers. Rep. Daniels, if you want to start.
So I'm new to this whole political thing. I've owned a trucking company my whole life. Been out in the what I call the real world, raised a family in public schools, and now an empty nest. And I've sold off part of my businesses. I decided it was time to come into politics. So my district is Southern Summit County, LA, I like to call it, Lower Akron, and we have a mix of a suburban and rural district in Southern Summit County. The jewel of Southern Summit County is a place called the Portage Lakes, which is a great summer recreation area and winter recreation area too.
That's coming,
Yes.
unfortunately, if you're a warm weather person. And then Rep. Williams.
Yeah, so I have the honor of serving District 44 up in Northwest Ohio. After overcoming a lot in my childhood and adulthood, going from being a homeless high school dropout to being disabled and eventually making my way through college, I became a practicing attorney and a college professor where I taught constitutional law, and criminal procedure. And I just felt a calling to give back and serve at a greater capacity. So, I ran for the legislature, serving in my second term now, first term in leadership here in the House. So I try to bring my expertise as a criminal defense attorney and as a college professor in that area of criminal justice reform, both increased penalties, but also some reform on the back end to help people transition back into the community. So that's been like a spearhead for me coming out of my office is that type of legislation.
Absolutely. Thank you. I always feel like your testimony, especially on the floor, is so compelling. So I'm excited to get your, knowledge on the legal aspect of this bill. Daniels, you as well. So the bill would strengthen Ohio's hate crime statutes. Obviously, this comes in the wake of the horrible murder, assassination of Charlie Kirk, and the murder of the Speaker of the Minnesota House, Melissa Hortman.
Yeah.
So I guess I want to just open the floor to first talk about what were your initial thoughts when you heard about both of those murders?
Yeah, so for me, when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, I was actually on my way back from Columbus, in the car with my campaign manager driving, and we were watching that actually on social media when it happened. And first, it was shock and awe. I thought the country was going to come out in opposition to that type of violence, like we saw in previous shootings when we saw Scalise get shot and other individuals get shot and other politically motivated attacks. But the next day, I was surprised to see people I knew since I had grown up, celebrating the assassination of an individual like Charlie Kirk, someone that was so important to the movement of just opening up our college campuses, the open dialogue and debate, being able to talk about controversial subjects from a way that even a student, a layman, could understand it. And instantaneously, we got to work on drafting legislation, especially when his killer, when we looked at those charges and what charges were being dropped, the terrorism, the worst charge. I reached out to Representative Daniels and said, "Hey, I know you were interested in this type of legislation before this even occurred. Let me show you what we've drafted," and that's where it came from. That we wanted to make sure that when we have clear intention shown, that you purposely are acting because of a person's political affiliation, either their race or their gender, those type of crimes need to be punished to the full hilt of our criminal penalties, which is aggravated murder, potential death sentences here in the state of Ohio. We need to make it perfectly clear, and we even added some other language as it relates to elected officials, because we've had a large number of threats of elected officials here in the state of Ohio, including out of my own office, where we received white powder mailed to our office, and an individual is being prosecuted for that now. We want to send a clear deterrent that says, hey, in the state of Ohio, if you decide to engage in that type of conduct with that purpose behind it, that we can prove that you are going to be punished the most severe way here in the state of Ohio.
Thank you for explaining that. Rep. Daniels, I know that you were really struck by former Speaker Hortman's murder.
Yeah, so I had only been in the legislature for about a year when that happened, and I never thought of a state level politician being a target. It just really never crossed my mind, nor my wife's mind, or my kids' mind. So to see that happen, it was very jarring. It really made us think a lot. You know, the governor here stepped up patrols to help protect us. Um, it was a concept that had never crossed my mind at all. So it was a shock. And then I was in the Rife in our office building here in Columbus when Charlie Kirk was killed. And I'm a little bit older, so I wasn't super familiar with Charlie Kirk. I knew who he was, but I wasn't involved in the passion that the younger people are. And I was really taken aback when I saw the staff around the Rife Center react to the severity of their affection for him, for his message, and I think most importantly, for his willingness to challenge social norms, his willingness to say the things that people don't want to hear. And that's what really shook me, to think that an act of political violence is an act against our society. You're hurting the person you're hurting, but you're also terrorizing others who might be the people that we need to hear the most, because those opinions that you disagree with, if we quiet the things we disagree with, then the things we agree with have the risk of being silenced as well. So it's I think the timing is right. I think this is a bipartisan measure. I think this goes to both sides of the aisle. I think it goes to humanity. I think anybody who celebrates either the attack on Speaker Hortman or Charlie Kirk is just not thinking of it correctly. That's all I have to say about it.
And I think it was important when we released our press releases and statements that we highlighted both of those. It's not a partisan issue. You know, when the former speaker was murdered in her home along with her husband, you know, I had to go home and tell my wife that, hey, I've been informed. Don't be scared if you see a lot of law enforcement around our house, that there's going to be an increased number of patrols. And I had to have that conversation with my wife about what safety measures we had to have at our house, because we have a house that's very accessible. And it was kind of an eye-opening moment to see the look on my wife's face. Like I never, she had heard about the white powder incident to my office, but she never thought that she could be a potential target. And as I explained to people, you know, if you celebrate the murder of Charlie Kirk, whether or not you agree with his policy positions or his statements, you know, on the floor every week, Representative Daniels and I, we take votes. And no matter where we end up on the side of an issue, there's always an opponent. So that means it would just, and everyone would be justified to try to bring harm against us because we either voted on one side of an issue or another, or even if we didn't vote on that issue and just stayed out of it, those same parties could be mad because we didn't champion their causes. We have to come to a realization that political violence is domestic terrorism. It is. And that we can't allow that type of violence to silence us. We represent our districts. We have 120,000 plus people that we represent, that they elected us to be their voice. And if we silence part of who we are, we're silencing the voice of our constituents. And we can't tolerate that in the state of Ohio.
Thank you for sharing that perspective, both of you. I think that that's a good thing to hit on, and potentially we hit on it more later, is the democracy piece of it. Is what is our democracy? What is our Constitution? First Amendment, free speech. It did feel a little bit like a threat to the democracy.
Absolutely. We have lost the art in this country of having spirited debate with people we disagree with. We've gotten into a pattern of demonizing, of not being willing. I had lunch with a friend from high school today, and he said, I love politics. I'm passionate about it, but I also hate it. And I said, well, what if you could have a deep conversation with somebody you disagree with and not have anger involved in it? And he said, well, then I would love it. It would feel like high school again. And that's what we need to try to focus on getting back to.
And I think we've seen it in the state of Ohio. And we were proactive when we passed Senate Bill 1, right? That was a hot button topic bill. It was guided towards open and honest debate on college campuses because we've seen it. I've experienced it in college. Being a black conservative in a very liberal school, I was demonized for my viewpoints. But I was always willing to have the debate. I was always willing to speak up about what my policy positions were and why I came to those conclusions. And I've been able to change the hearts and minds of individuals, including members of my own family, my extended family on my wife's side, where we had open and honest debates about politics, and they didn't understand certain topics because they've never had the chance to sit down and say, hey, you believe that, why? What's the basis for it? Oh, I didn't know that exists. I give them some literature on studies that I've read or journal articles, and they would maybe keep their same perspective or change their perspective on a particular topic. But we can't get to a point where we can't debate those issues. And that's what we saw leading up to Senate Bill 1. That's why part of that bill was directly intended to open up debate on college campuses where students could feel free to have a particular opinion, and they wouldn't have to regurgitate the opinion of their professors just to pass. And then to see this on a college campus happen, where one of our leading advocates for free speech was assassinated in front of crowds, and then to watch people even in the crowd stand up and celebrate while he was being carried to a vehicle trying to save his life it's abhorrent. But and all we can do as legislators is respond within our authority, which is to draft legislation, change statutes. And I think no one should disagree that if someone is trying to cause you harm, because this bill doesn't just deal with murder, it deals with any violent felony. It deals with even misdemeanors. If you are motivated by political affiliation, political intentions, race, gender, then that should be a factor in sentencing, even for the smallest crime in the state of Ohio. If you're doing property damage to a vehicle based on political affiliation, that should be a factor in sentencing. And we do that in this bill. So it's not just about murder and the death penalty or potential death penalty. It's about even the smallest crimes that, if they're politically motivated, that should be a factor the court considers.
I have a very liberal constituent who's a good friend of mine. I've known her for 25 years, and she posted on Facebook the other day that she's had 3 political signs destroyed in her yard. So that's a pretty clear, example of where people have grown to think that it's okay to do physical harm to property or to people.
Thank you for sharing that, Rep. Williams. You segued into the next question that I had. A lot of people are perseverating on this death penalty piece of this legislation. Could you just outline point blank why the death penalty is included in it?
Yeah, so the death penalty has always been debated, and there's going to be people that disagree with it just in principle. But here in the state of Ohio, it's the most severe penalty that we have available. And the reason is there's study after study that show that it has a two-part effect. One is the specific deterrent to the individual offender, that if you're going to commit this crime, this is the penalty that you're going to get. But it's also a general deterrent to society that says, look, we saw someone that committed a crime like this. We saw that they were sentenced to execution, and hopefully, with the right tools in place, we can restart our executions here in the state of Ohio. That the execution was carried out. That's a deterrent that goes across the state that says, look, I'm risking losing my life if I engage in this type of violence. And even more importantly is the lower level offenses, the felonious assaults, the aggravated assaults, the criminal damaging, the simple assaults, the M1, disorderly conduct, any type of criminal offense where you are motivated with that evil intent. I mean, since time immemorial, to use a lawyer's term, we look at what's known as mens rea, a guilty mind. What is your intention behind it? Did you act with purpose? Did you act with knowledge? Were you reckless? Were you negligent? We've always been able to determine the level of offense based on the guilty mind, the intention that you had. So it's reasonable to say, hey, if you have these severe evil intentions, you should be facing the most severe penalties available in the state of Ohio, which includes the death penalty.
Thank you for including that, Rep. Daniels. I want to ask, what response has this legislation gotten, either from constituents, other folks at the other side of the aisle? Talk me through it.
It's been all positive. I regularly, because I thoroughly enjoy political debate and discussion, and I've had people from both sides of the aisle come to me really with positive feedback across the board. The only unusual avenue that I think it took was the death penalty thing. I didn't pick the death penalty. Aggravated includes the death penalty. So, this is one where Josh and I disagree a little bit. Maybe we should fight.
Please no.
Please no. We see the death penalty a little bit differently. But it was in the aggravated level. We took it up to aggravated, and that's where it was. But no, the reaction has been very positive, and I've been happy to see where a number of people have reached out and kind of spilled their guts a little bit about how sad they see the state of affairs right now and people's unwillingness to have dialogue. If you're interested in this topic, an interesting thing to do is look at Bobby Kennedy's speech when he found out that Martin Luther King had been killed. It's a fascinating speech because there was no social media, no one in the crowd. He was actually at a political rally, and you can Google it and you watch the whole thing. He had to get everybody's attention, asked them to put their signs down, and then he gave a very heartwarming speech about how important it is to value the debate and who we're going to become as a country. And he said that 65 years ago. And, he said Martin Luther King was killed by a white man. Well, my brother was killed by a white man, too. It's a very powerful speech. And here we are 60 some years later um, having similar discussions.
Thank you for sharing that, Rep. Williams.
Yeah, I think it's very important that we have this discussion. The only pushback that I got is people that want to ban the death penalty, and they always bring up the example of people that have been exonerated from the 1970s or 80s when DNA wasn't around, videos weren't around. I think convictions nowadays that are that result in a sentence to death has substantial evidence. It's not relying on just witness accounts anymore that can be unreliable or coerced confessions like we saw back in the 60s, using things like the third degree or inherent coercive tactics by law enforcement to get a confession. These are rare cases where we seek the death penalty in the state of Ohio, but you have to have that available as a deterrent. The Attorney General came in and testified on another bill that talks about alternative means of execution, and he said that has to be available. The Prosecutors Association came and said we have to have that tool available to put a general deterrent out there that this isn't going to be tolerated in the state of Ohio. But that portion of the bill makes up maybe just 10%. The substantial portion is it says any violent felony. This is going to be a factor in sentencing that leans towards incarceration, that there's going to be a political motivation specification, meaning even if it's an underlying felony, you're going to get the maximum sentence allowed under the law plus some additional years. And even for misdemeanors, it's going to be a factor in sentencing. I think those are things that should be non-negotiable. I think everyone should agree that if someone's acting out of political motivation or motivation based on race, based on biological sex, that those are the type of intentions that we want to make sure we punish severely here in the state of Ohio, because we're going to lose our country if we don't. We see all kinds of other countries where political violence springs up, where one political party comes into power, the opposition thinks they can raise arms and bring violent uprising in order to bring their political means to accomplish their political goals by violent means, and we don't want that in the United States. We've always had a system where the founding fathers protected free speech as the first amendment that we put to the Constitution because it is imperative to keep our democracy intact, that you can have an opinion, you can articulate that opinion, and you're not going to be fearful of having violent attacks because you hold on to a particular viewpoint. We have to lead by example. Our kids are watching. Our kids watch that video. It's on the internet. You can watch it every day. And, I have a 20-year-old son, and I don't ever want my kid to fear the fact that he can't be open and honest about his beliefs because it's unpopular or because a certain group may not like it or want to silence your speech. I want him to live in a country like I believe I grew up in, where you can have that open and honest debate and agree to disagree. And as an adult, we can go and have a beer together afterwards and laugh about the fact that, there's a lot of Democrat colleagues of mine in the House. We have these spirited debates all the time. We're not going to agree on certain issues, but we still debate it, even though we know we won't agree. We still will talk about it, and we'll even laugh about it when we're passing each other in the halls. It's never gotten to the point where either there was this threat of violence between us. It's never gotten to the point where it's disrespectful with some of my colleagues, that you can have that type of debate. Now, we will try to convince each other they're wrong. We'll try to provide studies and research and things of that nature. But not once have I ever really feared for my life until I saw the murder of Charlie Kirk. That day, I went back to carrying my firearm. And, we have rules in the house where we can't carry a firearm, but my holster's on my hip right now and it's empty because my gun has to be stored away because I can't carry here. But when I leave this building, when I leave the state house, my gun is on my hip because I don't know who has evil intentions towards me. I even had a blogger here in Columbus, post a picture of me getting shot with the gun discharging next to my head because I introduced a bill he didn't agree with. And eventually he pulled it down, but that was so distasteful that I'm like, hey, that could be inciting violence towards me. One of your readers may see that and see it as justification to murder me. And we walk outside all the time between our office building and the State House. And now we have increased security because of it. We have security in our garage, making sure our legislators are protected. But this is the reality we have to live in now. And hopefully, I pray that we walk away from the cliff's edge, that we go back to having open and honest discussions, and we teach our kids that that's okay. But I wrote an article showing the escalation of this rhetoric over the last 20 years. It started with microaggressions or physical violence, and therefore you can fight back against a microaggression with physical violence. Then there was justification when President Trump was first elected to beat over the head your opponents with metal pipes, and we saw those fights in the street. And now it's gotten to the point where it's justified somehow by some groups, some fashion of our society to actually murder someone because they're your political opponent. I thought we had gotten past that since the 1960s, and we're starting to see an uptick again. And we're sending a clear indication here in the state of Ohio it's not going to be tolerated.
And I hope that not just the penalties, because I'm not a criminal attorney. I guess sometimes I wonder if someone who's committing an act of severe violence thinks about the ramifications when they're making that decision. I don't know. But I hope this bill, because we got a lot of media attention over this. It got a whole lot of media attention. So I hope that it will spur the debate and spur the discussion about having free and open debates. We as Americans, if you study politics, if you study right, left, we're about this far apart in reality. Yeah. What's different is our perspective that we came to that from. So if you came from this side, you may have come from one background. Josh was talking about his in-laws. They may not have seen some of the things that somebody from this side came from. So you're not really that different a person. You just came to your ideas from your experiences, which were different from other people's experiences. That's the nuts and bolts of being human. And that's where that debate is. Let me share with you what my perspective is and how my perspective might be different from yours and why. And then I should open my ears and say, what's your perspective? You come from a different area, different background, different race, different religion. Could you share with me some of your thoughts and try to convince me that I'm wrong? That's spirited political debate at its core. And that's what we need to be as humans.
Thank you so much for that. Quickly, I want to talk about our social media. You can follow us all on the Ohio House GOP Caucus on Facebook, the Ohio House _GOP on Instagram, and OHR GOP Caucus on Twitter. You can subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Representative Daniels, Representative Williams, thank you so much for coming on for this topic.